I wanted to do an add-on video. So this video has been recorded after the course went live. As I've said in previous videos, throughout the course I'll keep this updated as often as possible as EOS development kind of evolves. So one of the kind of big changes in v1.2, as you can see here, is the ABI generator is no longer packaged with the EOSIO CPP. So previously, when we were running the CompTrack script, EOSIO CPP-O and then the WAST and the CPP, that was spitting out an ABI for us, which we were then using in the next command, this EOSIO CPP-G command. The ABI was being generated for us by EOSIO CPP using this -O flag. This is no longer the case with the latest versions of EOSIO, so you're going to have to write your ABIs by hand. I actually think they did this intentionally. This was not like some mistake that led to all these breaking changes. I don't think they wanted people relying on the ABI generator, as it was a bit fickle and could often cause bugs, pretty nefarious bugs actually. It fails kind of silently. It doesn't tell you that the ABI is wrong. You'll just try and run an action against your smart contract, and the data will be garbage, or it'll tell you an index is out of bounds or things like that. So I think this was a good decision that they made. I also think the majority of like the core developers and Block 1 developers were writing their ABIs by hand anyway, so I think it's a good idea that you learn how to do that. So even if they do add an ABI generator back in, you won't be at the mercy of the ABI generator. And even if you are at the mercy, you'll understand what's going on behind the scenes and be able to debug it and see what's going on. What is this thing spitting out, and is it actually correct? An ABI consists of this JSON essentially. These things are a little bit less important, and they're not really covered so heavily in the documentation as is the version. These four are the ones we're going to focus on in this video. Because those are the ones you're going to be altering the most as you write smart contracts. So the first one is types. This is essentially if you're defining any new types that aren't in the built-in types. You can see that they link to the documentation right here. These are the built-in types afforded to you by EOSIO CPP. Make note of this link. I think it would be helpful to have a handy list of these built-in types around so you can cross-reference as you're writing smart contract code. But you'll see in the token, by the way, we'll be using the EOSIO token as an example to write an ABI. You'll see here that they're using the account name throughout the smart contract. The problem is account name is not a built-in type. Name is actually the built-in type, and then account name gets typedef to a name. So you're going to have to add this is essentially what this type section of the ABI is for. It's for if you want to define any new types built on the built-in types. You just go ahead and define it as new _type_name, the name of the variable, and then the type, the actual built-in type that you're going to be using there. So if you're not using anything other than the built-in types, you won't have to do this, but where account name is a fairly common variable to be using, be sure to define that here under the types section of the ABI. The next one is structs. So we've gone over structs in the intro to CPP course, and they're also found extensively throughout EOSIO development as we went through in the course. You can see here in the smart contract, they've defined the struct here, but they actually, I don't think, write the ABI for it because it's not necessary. And that brings me to the next point. So obviously you define your own structs in the smart contract, and you'll have to define these in the ABI if you're going to use them. But another reason that the structs section of the ABI exists is because the parameters that you're going to pass to your actions are actually defined as structs. They're actually passed in as structs, and you'll see that when you run things in the command line, right? You use the JSON curly brackets and pass things in that way. Well, you're actually defining a struct there and passing it into the action. So in this case, we have a create action, right? If we look at the definition of the create action up here, you can see it takes an account name as an issuer and the asset as a maximum supply. You have to define that in the ABI here. You can see that they've named the variable, or the parameter issuer, they named the other parameter maximum supply, and you've told them both the type, the account name, and the asset. So for all the parameters that you're going to pass in as into the actions of your smart contracts, you're going to have to define those in the ABI. So here is the create. You can see they did the same for issue with the to, quantity, and memo. They do retire, etc., etc. The other thing that you have to do in the struct section of the ABI is if you're going to use any multi-indexes, you have to define the structs there as well. So you can see here that we have an account, right? If you remember in the EOSIO token videos, we had the account struct, which is going to hold the balance for users. You can see here that all it has is an asset and balance, and that's what they've defined here in the ABI, is a balance of type asset. So those are the two reasons you needed to define anything in the structs. The next section of the ABI is actions. This one's pretty simple. It's just the name of the action, of course, and then it actually matches the struct that gets passed into the action here in this case. So you have the action name of transfer, and then the parameter up here, transfer, the struct up here. As they point out in the documentation, these two don't need to be the same name for any reason, but they do it for brevity's sake and cleanliness, and I think it's probably good practice. That way you can cross-reference, why isn't this parameter getting passed correctly? Well, you can see, go look at the struct, the transfer struct definition, and make sure that that's correct. So actions are, obviously you can see, pretty simple to write once you have the struct written. Finally, we get to the tables, and I think this is going to be the section of the ABI where people are going to have the most trouble. If we look at the the account multi-index definition down here, so we've already defined the struct for an account, right? And we know how to, presumably the ABI knows how to handle accounts, but now we need to define and say, hey, by the way, we also want this table associated with it. And what the table definition consists of is a name, the name of the table, the type that it's going to hold. In this case, it's the struct that we've defined up above in the ABI, the index type of your primary index, and then the different key types and the key names. As we've talked in the previous multi-index videos, you can multi-index can have multiple different keys that they use. In the case of the accounts multi-index, we only have the single primary key, so we're using the uint64, which if we look at the primary key definition up here is just a name, which we already have discussed gets type defed into a uint64, so that's why that's there. They named it currency. There's no real reason that they named it that. Really, I think your key names can be named anything. And then the index type of the table in this case is a I64 because of the primary key being a name. So that is essentially the ABIs in a nutshell. You can see that they say, hey, putting it all together, you can see that where they got the EOSIO.token ABI if you were to write it by hand. Again, there's a couple extra things down here at the bottom, but you don't really need to pay too much attention to them unless you're trying to do something fairly advanced with the ABI. In that case, I also would recommend taking to the Telegram, because again, the core developers, the Block 1 developers, I think the majority of those guys are actually writing the ABIs by hand, and they were doing that before this change went through anyway, so they should be able to help you out. And then of course, I myself, if you want to ping me on the various social media platforms, I've had many people do that already. Completely happy to help if you get stuck on anything. Okay, I think that's it. See you in the next video.